Welcome, skeptics and truth seekers, to Schoolhouse Crock, the podcast that exposes the real deal behind public education in the state of Colorado. I am your host, Stacey, and on this show, we're not here to sugarcoat. We are here to unveil the truths, challenge the norms, and unpack the crock of you-know-what that often goes unnoticed in the realm of education. Today, I have Amber Cecil with me, and we are going to be discussing the recent changes that the Biden administration has made to Title IX. We may all understand and know Title IX as the legislation that gave women rights to have their own sports and to be able to safely participate in sports without the interference of men. It does expand even further than that in terms of any type of protection for women, whether it's academically or in sports. It's just in educational settings. It protects the women. These changes that they have recently made are appalling and have gone from giving women a so-called safe space to be themselves to taking that away completely and allowing biological men who believe that they are women to participate and compete with them. The changes that we will be discussing today go into effect August 1st, 2024.
Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972 is a federal civil rights law that prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex in education programs and activities.
One of the first changes to Title IX is that it's going to be expanding the definitions of sex discrimination. This new rule will include sexual orientation, gender identity, and pregnancy. I do believe that including pregnancy is a good step because in a society where we actually discourage women from pregnancy, we push abortion like their oil changes and don't actually give women look at, some of the societal norms, if you would, for maternity leave, right? We've been making changes with like where women can pump and have lactation stations and stuff like that. So I do believe that expanding this to pregnancy is not necessarily a concern, but to expand it to sexual orientations and gender identity is scary because this is supposed to be based in facts. And if you're including gender identity, that's not a fact. That's a theory. That's ideology. And while one day you may feel as if you're a woman, the next day you may feel as if you're a man, right? I mean, isn't that what non-binary is? Like they're non-conforming. So how can we take that serious and start to allow this ideology into a woman's space?
Well, exactly. And when this came into effect in 1972, it was a huge win for women because we didn't have our own spaces. Women have always been athletic. Women have always wanted to compete in sports. It even goes back to the 60s when we had a woman who competed in a marathon. And in order for her to compete, she just entered in with her initials. And that was a big triumph because she did very well and men sexualized it and they were grabbing her and groping her. And it was really gross in the way that they behaved toward her. But when in 72, we get Title IX and we start to get our own spaces and we get our own sports and we actually get to have our own scholarships and our own divisions. And that was a big deal because there are amazing women athletes out there, amazing women athletes. And when you break it down, they don't have the same abilities as men. When you look at Leah Thomas, who was born Will Thomas, when he was competing as a male, he was 400th or something like that, and decided that now I'm going to identify as a woman. Now I'm Leah Thomas and I'm going to compete. And now suddenly I'm this amazing woman swimmer. And obviously, as male characteristics are competing against women characteristics, we're not going to compete the same way. So when we start to have men competing in women's spaces, we're not going to have the same abilities as a biological male. We're just not going to because we are built differently. That is just how it is.
Well, and if you take it from the athletic aspect and look at the academic aspect.
And I think when you talk about intellectually, we can compete in those same spaces, but physically there is a difference. And that's physically a difference between a man and a woman. But now when you have these men who are coming in and saying, I identify as a woman, I'm going to come into your space, and vice versa, it makes things unsafe. They can come in and they don't have to prove anything, and you can't ask them to prove anything. So while there are probably men who do come into women's spaces who really do believe that they are a woman under gender dysphoria, and that probably does exist, but there are men who are going to come under a predatory behavior as well, who just want to expose themselves to women and want to be in those spaces to possibly harm women and girls. And that is a really slippery slope that we are on.
So, sexual discrimination includes sexual orientation or gender identity. If we go back to the pretty notorious case out of Virginia where the teenage boy identified as a girl, was in the girls' bathroom, and then was sexually assaulting girls in the bathroom under the guise of, I'm a girl, so I should be able to be in this bathroom. It's creating hostile environments for girls, which is ironic because one of the other changes that they've made is they have expanded the definition of sex harassment. So sexual harassment will now include actions that create a hostile environment. So the way that it should be taken, trans women, biological men who go into women's bathrooms, women's locker rooms, women's dorms room, that should be a hostile environment. But that's not what they mean. What they really mean is when you make them feel uncomfortable, when you question why do they get to be in there, that is now a hostile environment based off of sex, and therefore is going to be considered sexual harassment.
And that's insanity. That's absolute insanity, because that used to be considered assault.
Yes.
If you walked into a woman's locker room and you had a penis and you exposed it to the women in that room, you would be arrested.
Rightfully so.
Rightfully so, absolutely. And now what it is, you go in there and you expose your penis and you can't question it. You can't ask them, what the hell are you doing in here? You can't ask them, are you a man or a woman? You can't ask them, you can't do any of those things. Even though clearly you know that they're a man, you can't tell them to get out of here. You are a man. What are you doing?
Yeah. Well, and if we look at Riley Gaines's experience, so when Leah Thomas comes into the locker room, these girls are told, hey, this is happening and you can't say anything. Just pretend like everything is normal. That's not normal. And that's college age. So you're probably a little bit more comfortable in your body, but like, remember getting ready for PE in middle school? Like, every girl was, you were either going into the shower stall to change, you were going into the bathroom stall to change. Like, you were embarrassed by your body. And now here we are saying, oh, and by the way, because it's not just, this isn't just happening in colleges, this is happening in middle schools and high schools where girls are, this is weird. And they're being told that they just have to shut up, sit down, and accept it, and you can't say anything. Well, gosh, doesn't that sound like the patriarchy coming in and taking over for women, right?
100%. I thought that that's what we were against. I thought that that's the whole
purpose of this. And now we are going backwards. I mean, nothing says that women are a weaker sex than men coming in and saying, oh, by the way, I now identify as a girl, and therefore I'm going to enter into your space, whether you like it or not. That is mind-blowing. So one of the other things with the expanded definition of sexual harassment that I thought was interesting, because I think it just creates a slippery slope, is it includes sex-based conduct that, based on the totality of the circumstances, is subjectively and objectively offensive and is so severe or pervasive that it limits or denies a person's ability to participate in or benefit from your education program or activity. Well, isn't that what is going on with people like Leah Thomas? Isn't that what it's doing? But that's not going to be considered, because look at Riley Gaines. The girls were told that if you say anything about Leah Thomas, you will lose your scholarships.
You will. They'll lose their scholarships, they could lose their housing, or they could even go on probation. That's the fear. I've seen a couple of surveys that some of these groups go out and do, the conservative groups go out and do on campuses. They'll ask questions, and these students are afraid to answer truthfully because they are afraid that they are going to lose scholarships or go on academic probation because of the answers that they give.
Exactly. And so this is no longer meant to protect women. It's meant to protect men with mental illnesses. That's honestly what this is. I mean,
And
call a
so
spade a spade.
without question, we are supposed to accept this radical ideology, and it's insane. And so, how do we protect our daughters from this? How do we protect our little girls from a grown man coming into their space and exposing their genitals to them?
One of the other changes that was made was a revision in the grievance hearings. I know that you looked into that. Can you tell us a little bit about what you found out with that, Amber?
Yes. So normally when you have an accusation or you make an accusation, you basically go before either a judge or you go before a jury, depending on the circumstances. If you are accused, you have the right to see your accuser. But in these circumstances now, as the person who's making the accusation, you can choose to not actually go before that anymore and actually just have a single mediator. That doesn't make any sense to me because it's changing our due process. It's changing our judicial system in a way where if I'm being accused of a crime, I have the right to face my accuser. That is my right in our criminal justice system. And we do have false accusations that happen, both male and female. It takes away from their ability to fight back on a crime that maybe they're being accused of but didn't actually commit.
When things like this are done, they always try to say that it's for somebody else's protection, right? Like, oh, but it's for the kids, or oh, it's for the women, or so on and so forth. And so I think that they try to say that this is to try and help more women come forward, right? Because we know that there is a large number of women who don't report stuff. But instead of addressing the real issue, why aren't they coming forward? It's because they're afraid of the intimidation. They're afraid of being drugged through it. Well, that's what we need to be addressing and not taking away someone's due rights, right? But as someone who truly believes in our Constitution and thinks that we need to stand by it for better or for worse. Like if women aren't coming forward because they're afraid to face their assaulter,
Who they're accusing, absolutely.
then we need to figure out how to work on that. Now, we've been talking about this so far in terms of a woman accusing a man, right? But let's flip the script here because we know that this is going to open the door for trans women, biological men, to accuse women of discriminating against them in the locker room, discriminating against them if they got a scholarship when they shouldn't have. And then that trans woman / biological male does not have to go before that girl, that biological woman in court.
Yep.
Or not even necessarily just a biological woman in court, about a biological male. Say it's a coach, say it's an athletic director, say it's a professor. This is giving them the ability to continue. I mean, look at what we see. It's now a hate crime to gender someone. Like, this is just continuing that circus.
It's going to be considered hate crimes. It's going to be considered sexual assault. It's all going to fall under these groupings, and I don't know where it's going to stop. It's going to bog down our judicial system. So when there are real crimes happening, real rapes, real assaults, people aren't going to really to file claims because why?
Well, and you know what? To that point, I think we are almost already at that at point, unfortunately, because we do have so many predators out there who are doing this stuff already, not based off of gender identity or sexual orientation. We have this going on so often that we're already overwhelmed. I think that we need to be aware of this because if you complain about someone being in the locker room, if you complain about a biological male who's identifying as a woman being assigned to your dorm room in college, if you complain about a biological male who is identifying as a female getting a scholarship that was supposed to be dedicated specifically to women, you can now be charged. They can now come after you. So it's continuing this whole, you can't make me feel like I'm in a hostile environment unless it's a trans woman, biological male, saying it to somebody else. That's basically what they're doing here.
Correct. And I want to stress too that this is not just about college. Now, it does really affect the collegiate level, it really does, but it's any educational institute that receives government funding. So this will go down to the high school level. It will go down to the elementary level. It will go down to the preschool level. I'm telling you, it's going to hit anyone that gets government funding. All of these preschoolers that these parents don't, they let them choose their gender. This will affect our kids at a preschool level. This will affect families at a preschool level. If you call a child the wrong gender, child calls a child the wrong gender, says he or she when they are they or them, or the wrong he or she, you're going to get in trouble. This is insanity.
So this is just some of my kind of like free thoughts here. But first of all, and if we look at this specifically towards the athletic aspect of it, why did we create women's sports in the first place? Because we know, like, look at women's boxing, right? We've seen trans women who are biological men get in the ring or the octagon and pummel the ever loving snot
They
out of these
dominate the sport.
women.
Dominate the sport. Of course they do.
The women's
they're men.
wrestling.
They have testosterone.
Yes, yes. So then does that mean that we're now going to let girls start using steroids, right? Like, shouldn't they be able to so that they can compete at that level? I mean, I don't recommend women doing that because there's a lot of issues with that. The next thing is, if biological men who identify as women are at a disadvantage to biological men who don't identify as women and are on the same playing level as women, why are we not just opening up sports and having co-ed sports across the board? Because
that would make the most sense.
And I know that we've talked pretty heavily about sports because I think that's where it's the most obvious, but this is also pertaining to academic scholarships. Like, why are we taking away opportunities for girls to go to college, to have that funding? Are they not good enough because they're a girl? I mean, that's what we're saying, right?
And there are scholarships that are out there that are specific, that are gender specific. And I would assume that because of discrimination, we can't stop them from applying.
Yep. And it also applies with dorm room assignments now as well. And as someone whose daughter is going to be going off to college in the next 2 years, that terrifies me. Yep. Well, and when you're pushing for this, you also are saying, like, you can't complain, right? So does that mean that girls who biological women, biological females who are in a space with a biological male identifying as a female and they're being abused, right? Do they get to stand up and say? Do they get to call it out? Do they get to, accuse them? Or are they going to be told, oh, that doesn't look good? Look at the shooting incidences that we've had that have transgender people as the shooter. How fast does that disappear? That gets shut down really quick. Oh, nope, no, nothing to see here, nothing to see here. Well, is that what it's going to be like? The same thing happened with the biological male who identified as a woman in Virginia and was in the girls' bathrooms, right? Like, they tried to shut that down. In fact, the story that we heard about was actually the second school that this had happened at. The first one, they just quietly moved him to a different school.
Correct.
And so we are losing our voice again to give it to biological men. I cannot stress that enough.
It just completely negates what Title IX was created for. And why have it at all? Why have Title IX at all if this is what's going to happen? Why have women's sports at all if this is what's going to happen?
Why have specific dorm rooms? Why not just open up all the dorm rooms?
That's exactly it. We are basically all the women's rights. And I would say I'm a conservative feminist in a way, because I believe that I have the right to my space and I have the right to fight as a woman and the right to do things as a woman. But I definitely believe in men and having the men as the men as the head of the household and that sort of thing. But I believe women should have their own space, and I believe that women should have these things. But why have it at all if it's not going to work?
And what it's really doing is it's removing biological females from the equation for biological males to feel better about themselves. And I don't think that we should have to shrink ourselves to make room for somebody that is a biological male who thinks he is a woman. I just don't think that we should have to do that.
Exactly.
And if we
And
were truly fighting for women, then we would see what this is and stop it immediately.
I think as far as your daughter being an athlete, I mean, we're trying to raise our girls to believe that they can do things. And your daughter's an athlete.
Yep.
Don't you want her to know that she can succeed as an athlete?
Yep.
And now we're in a world where these women are going to give up. These girls are going to give up and say, well, I'm not going to be able to get a scholarship anyway.
Yep.
I'm not going to be able to go to compete at a college level anyway.
Well,
because I might potentially go to a college where they're going to let biological males compete in my sports. So even if I get there, even if I get a scholarship, am I going to be able to maintain it? Am I going to be able to compete? Am I going to be able to win? Am I going to be able to do well? Am I going to be successful?
one of her sports is track and field. I have watched a ton of track meets now, and they have the girls and they have the boys. Each race, there is a dramatic difference in time between the women and the men. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us today, and thank you, Amber, for joining me today. We hope that this episode is insightful for you guys. One, to help you educate and understand what's going on, and two, maybe give you fire to stand up and say, this is not right. This is not okay. I know that there are organizations out there like Parents Defending Education who are trying to get together to fight for women and in terms of these Title IX changes and trying to stand up for them. So please pass this along, share this episode, educate your friend, your neighbor, your family, anybody you can, because we need to understand what is going on. I think this is just another example of how elections have consequences. And when we vote for a president who is pandering to whatever to try and get the support of they think is the majority, we need to stand up and show them that they are not the majority and that we are the majority and that they have gone too far and this needs to stop.
I would just encourage people to really look into some of these changes. I know the rewrite is somewhere over 1,000 pages, but if you go and look and just ask for the highlights of the rewrite, you can go in and look at them yourself. There's quite a few articles out there, and a lot of them are really from a mid-center point writing, so they don't necessarily lean right or left. So you can actually see what they are. You don't have to read the opinion. You can just read the actual writing.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you guys for joining us, and I hope you have a great week.